Patrick Cantlay has become one of the greatest players in the game at the moment. He did initially struggle with a back injury at the start of his career, but he has changed his swing to help with that. And today we're going to have an in-depth look at his swing, what he's changed and what makes him great. If you like this video, please check the link in the bio as there is a discount code for any swing analysis that you'd like to purchase from myself. So let's have a look from down the line and face on. So let's get him at address position. So you'll see Patrick has quite a strong grip in that left hand, pretty neutral with the setup, a little bit of spine tilt with the driver, little bit of foot flare there, minimal width in the stance, not super wide, just a nice sound setup. You'll see on the left hand side of the screen, very neutral with that posture, nothing screaming out, just very nice little rounded spine, little bit of knee bend, very traditional there. So let's take Patrick away. You'll see really those hands start to lead the backswing. Can you see how those hands lead the club there? Pretty unusual. Most guys, that club head will move first, but those hands almost move first in that initial portion of backswing. So let's just have a look from down the line. You'll see here he starts to move the club nicely into a position where that club head is outside the hands, that shaft is pointing directly at his belly button. Very traditional one-piece takeaway. Let's have a look from face on what he does with the body. He'll keep look how stable those hips are staying. Not a lot of rotation there, and that is something that he has worked on because Patrick has had an issue with his back, and a lot of that is because he gets a lot of X factor stretch, which we'll talk more specifically in the downswing. So you'll see here, look how stable those hips are. All that rotation is coming from the neck and the thoracic spine. Look at those hips. They're really not rotated. You can see here there's a tiny bit of rotation. Takes a tremendous amount of mobility through that upper part of the back and spine to create a body position like that. So let's just take those lines off for you, and you'll see there he's got a nice bit of width there. Those arms are pretty straight. You'll see this right arm will start to create a little bit of separation as we move a little further back. That's primarily just because Patrick doesn't rotate his shoulders or thorax tremendously in backswing. So let's just get these off. So let's just take him a few more frames back. So you'll see, look how that club head is staying outside his hands. Most guys, you'd see that club head a little bit more inside here, but that just helps him keep it a little bit more in front of him. You'll start to see he starts to set this club very upright, and we start to see that trail elbow get a little bit more away from his lead elbow there. You can see here, look how upright that driver shaft is now. Very upright. We'd see a lot of guys a little bit more flatter, but that's primarily because as he works back, that trail arm's going to work high and then a little bit behind him. But that's because he doesn't get a great deal of rotation through the spine, and he also doesn't get a great deal of wrist set. You can see here his wrists almost stay like set in stone here. Not a huge amount of wrist rotation and wrist set, and not a huge amount of chest rotation there. You'll see how he's moved off a little bit, so he's creating that Y position, which is a great way of creating some power. Again, look at those hips. Very little rotation in those hips here, or the pelvis more specifically. That belt buckle has not moved a great deal, and that's what created a lot of issues for Patrick, specifically in his spine, because he was getting a tremendous amount of X factor stretch in the backswing and then even more in the downswing, which we'll look at. So let's just bring him a few more frames up. You'll start to see that right elbow start to work behind his body. Really, that right elbow, look how much higher it is than the left and how much that club shaft is working up. Again, look at those hips. Very little movement there. Very much an arm swing. You'll start to see how those hands work very up rather than around him, and that elbow is very very much away from that left elbow and pretty high. Like I say, there's not a lot of rotation there that you'd see with some guys. That club face at the top, just a touch short, which I like to see. Let's build him up on face on. You'll see here, not a tremendous amount of wrist set there. Not a lot of pelvis rotation. You can see the pelvis starts to rotate a little bit more here, which he has worked on, and then bring him up to the top. Lots of width, little bit of elbow bend, which you will see with guys who don't have a tremendous amount of chest rotation. Don't get me wrong, he has got chest rotation there, but it's not like Rory, which he really whips it round. But also what we'll see is, look how little those hips have rotated. Again, that's what caused a lot of issues for Patrick, specifically the next few frames when he moves into downswing. But lovely, lovely position, nice wide position there with the hands. Like I said, a little bit of elbow bend just to help get that club up to the top. Club face, you can see pointing to the sky, a little bit of ever so slightly shut. And now let's bring him down into downswing. Now this is where Patrick really hurt his back. Watch those hips now. Can you see that move? What they are doing, they're not driving a great deal down. He doesn't use a lot of vertical force, Patrick. What he does do is use a lot of rotary force. So you'll see that hip, I'll just move these lines off the screen. What's happening is those hips are working back and around him. That left pocket is going to really move back behind him. Can you see how quickly those hips have now got back to point, or the belt buckle specifically got pointing back at the ball, whereas look at his shoulders. So that he hasn't rotated his shoulders a great deal. So what that creates is a tremendous amount of torsion, specifically through the lower spine, and that's where he had issues to start early on his career. He was more pronounced than this, and that's where a lot of those issues came from. So if you look from down the line, you'll see this movement of this hip really start to work back. Here, can you see that? A little bit of compression works back, and that helps him just shallow that trail elbow is going to pinch towards the lead elbow just to help shallow that club out a little bit there. You can see how that elbow is nicely below his left elbow, which really helps shallow it. He's maintained or regained some of that knee flexion in that trail knee there. Bringing him down, you'll notice with Patrick, he does early extend a little bit. Specifically, let's look at this angle here. You can see how he starts to move that trail hip towards the ball, and that head moves back. That just allows him to shallow the club because of his hands being quite high at the top, just because of how those wrists and that body is working. He has to get that little bit of extension there, and that head tilts back just to help shallow that club out. Early extension, it's got a bad rap, but it's there for a reason. So let's bring him down. You'll see how much separation or X factor stretch he's created in that torso. And then also look how much narrower he gets in that downswing. Look at that lead arm and how much bends there, and how close those hands are to his body. I'm assuming he works a little bit more on getting a little bit more width there. It's pretty narrow, especially with driver. So bring him a couple of frames down. You can see very, very, very narrow. That can be quite difficult to hit the ball consistently from there, but he is a tremendous athlete, and he does do a few funky things now to help with that narrow position. So we'll just bring him down a couple more frames. You'll see how those hips are driving more towards the ball. There you go, that right knee is driving towards, getting a bit of rotation here. Like I say, that elbow's very, very bent. Look at that position. It's almost a bit Lee Westwood here. I'll bring him a couple of frames down. You'll see there, I think this shot he does just hold on to it. I think it's the 18th of the players. You can see that club face is miles open there. I'm assuming he's just protecting against this water on this shot. So let's just bring him down on this face on view. You can see how much elbow bend there is there. And because of that very narrow in and that elbow bending, you're not going to see a tremendous amount of vertical force in Patrick's swing. We're going to see more of a rotational force. So what I mean by that is watch those hips. You'll see a lot of guys start to drive that lead hip up very soon after this position, but you can see, look how level that pelvis stays. Very, very level. Most guys are a lot more vertical in that action. They drive that lead hip up to create the power, whereas Patrick, he's creating a tremendous amount of stretch shortening cycle through the rib cage, the thorax, and the lead arm, and he does that by just creating rotational forces. He's pushing that lead foot this way to push that trail hip back and doesn't get a whole lot of vertical force. And that's why you see here, because of that rotation and almost that spinning of the hips, you look at the finish very low with those hips. Most guys, you'd see that pelvis up here at the finish, and you'll see how that pelvis is more in the middle of his stance rather than over that lead foot. And look at that trail foot, how much bend he's got there. I think that is just kind of a matchup, because he does get a little bit narrow here and then spins those hips back and hangs back a little bit on it, which also can sort of compound that back issue there of pulling those hips back and not really getting over that left side. And you can see there how much that trail toe is in that sort of flex position there. Very, very unique action. Quite simple and very elegant, I would say. When you see him swing, it's very sort of classic. Reminds me a little bit of Davis Love. Just very, very smooth. Not a lot of vertical force there. Just a tremendous amount of rotation through those hips. But that's where he has created a lot of back issues. Don't know if he still struggles with them, because he has worked with the guys at TPI just to really, really try and alleviate some of that X factor stretch on the downswing. And then I'm assuming he will be trying to get those hips a little bit more over that lead foot, because it can also cause some little flippy issues, as you can see on the left hand side of the screen, how he does leave that face open, and it probably relies a little bit more on timing, a little bit more old school swing, but he works it brilliantly, and I'm sure we're going to see Patrick winning some majors. If you've liked this swing analysis, please leave a comment, a like, and there is, like I said, a discount code in the description if you want me to analyse your swing.